Which one would you rather take home? The new Apple IIc.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Player One Start. So today is not actually a review video, but it's actually a project that I've been working on for a little while, and I thought I'd go ahead and showcase some progress that I'm making on it. So last summer I showcased that I got an Apple IIc. I've been after one of these computers for quite a while because this is actually the first computer I remember touching as a kid. My grandpa actually had one of these computers that he kept in his den, and after his death it was actually transferred down to the basement and I was finally allowed to touch it and play games on it. I do have some fond memories of playing games like the Oregon Trail and Lemonade Stand, and I'm sure there are many other great games that I want to try for this computer. So after I got this PC and tested it out, it works flawlessly, and I couldn't have been happier. However, things took a turn when I actually ended up buying my first complete in-box Apple II game. I was up near Chicago when I purchased this game at a retro game store. It was not that expensive, and I had heard of the game, but I don't think I'd ever played it before. And I also got it because it's also compatible with the Commodore 64. So if I do end up getting one of those computers as well, this game will serve purposes of comparison between the Apple II and the Commodore 64. That seems to be something I might do on this channel way in the future anyway, so might as well prepare for it. The problem is, once I got this game home, I had the Apple II set up exactly where I left it, and it was working prior to this. I was able to boot up ProDOS and get in there and mess around some things. However, I tried to load the game, and it got stuck at the loading screen. I could hear the drive spinning, however, I didn't see any more progress on the game load. At first I thought I wasn't being patient enough because these older computers can take a while to load some of these older games. However, I let this go on for about 10 minutes before I finally decided, okay, something's wrong. So here's my plan for this episode. I plan to see first, what is the problem? Is it the drive that is bad, or is there a problem with the board that is not being able to interpret what's being read by the drive? Let's go ahead and take apart the computer and see what we can do. For those of you that missed out on this computer in the 1980s, I feel bad for you. As I begin to work on this computer, I actually have to be taken aback just a little bit that I'm actually able to take apart the first computer I ever worked on. Granted, I only got to play with this computer a few times as I was over at my grandparents' house, but those few times apparently left a big impression on me, as I have not really gotten over my obsession with technology to this day. In preparation for this project, I did take a look at a couple other disassemblies of this, and this computer does not look like it's that hard to take apart. First, using the correct Phillips head screwdriver, I'm going to go ahead and take out all the screws on the back. And then once you get all those out, there are a few snaps on the front that you'll need to disengage, otherwise you can risk breaking the plastic as you take the front part of the case off from the back part. I had a pair of tweezers laying around that I was able to use to kind of shove in between those two plastic pieces without damaging them. This is a tricky process as the plastic can be quite brittle, but once you get them apart, the rest of the case should slide off very easily. And also don't forget that there are some snaps by the drive as well. The key to working on older consoles and computers is patience. You don't want to be in a hurry as you take this thing apart, because making any sort of sudden quick movements with these old plastic pieces can snap them right in half. I am taking special care to make sure this does not happen, as I don't want to have to go back and fix that later on. Another thing to note is that you shouldn't have to use a lot of force with these old cases either. They should come apart just with your hand strength, and you don't want to use tools all the way around the case because especially metal tools will leave a mark and indentation in the plastic. Once that does come apart, you can see how the board is laid out. There's the power source, the disk drive, and the keyboard. All of those are sitting on top of the logic board. There are a couple of screws holding in the power source, but once you get those out, the power source should just slide right out from the board, almost like a cartridge or an expansion card. The floppy disk drive just kind of sits on the board, and the only thing you have to be careful of is to actually take the cable out of the motherboard instead of using the drive to yank the cable out, because you can either damage the connector or bend some pins. On the back here you can see a common point of failure for these drives, and that is this belt that actually drives the motor. Over time, even though this is brand new now, I will have to replace this belt as it will wear out after constant use. The drive still has a cover on it, so we are actually going to have to take off these screws that are on the sides, and then we can see the inside of the drive. Before we do that though, I'm actually going to take off the keyboard so you can see the entire logic board of this machine. And wow, you can actually see that this was a marvel of 1984 engineering. Apple released the IIc in April of 1984 and discontinued it in August of 1988, so this computer is potentially 31 to 35 years old. So the Apple IIc is actually an Apple IIe that was made to be in a smaller case so it'd be more portable, but also sacrifices some of its expandability. Starting with a brief board tour, you can see 128 kilobytes of RAM soldered directly onto the board instead of on different chips that you could swap out. One thing that's nice about this board is it actually has everything labeled directly on the board where everything is at. You can see the CPU, which is a 6502 compatible running at about 1.023 MHz. The MMU is nearby, which allowed the Apple IIc to address more than 64 kilobytes of RAM. Looking at where we removed the power source, unfortunately I see some, looks like leakage from some of the capacitors inside maybe. I did check the power source to make sure that none of the capacitors were bulging. I assume that the seller I bought this from had already replaced it at some point in time, and this residue is just left over from that earlier power source. So the Apple IIc is actually a very well-designed computer in terms of portability. I'm not quite sure, but I don't think there were computers that were laptops yet. Portable computers were usually huge, bulky, and very expensive. So Apple wasn't really trying to make a mobile computer, but they were trying to make a computer that you could easily carry around with you, and if you had access to a computer outlet and a monitor, you could easily take your computer and move it somewhere else. So this is actually a very neat, compact computer, and I think the board is designed very well. However, unlike some of the other Apple II computers, there are no expansion slots, so what you see is what you get with this computer. So now that I've got this thing apart, I'm going to try out a couple of simple fixes. I'm going to go ahead and clean the drive heads, and I'm going to lubricate the drive rails to see if that's the reason why it's getting stuck. Alright, turning our attention back towards the drive, I'm going to go ahead and take out these screws. Once I get that cover off, I can see directly inside the drive, and you can see the read head there, which has this little lever on it, which almost looks like it's meant for you to move side to side, but it's actually so you can pick it up and so you can clean the drive head. There were also discs sold for the purpose of cleaning the drive head, so you didn't have to take it apart, but since I don't have one of those, this was my only option. Again, I'm also checking the board over for any sort of broken traces, anything that got dripped in here, or any other damage. So I'm going to clean the top and the bottom of the drive head, and sure enough, I ended up looking at my Q-tip after, and I saw that I had removed a fair amount of dust that had built up in there. A good method of troubleshooting is once you fix one thing, it's always good to test after each fix that you do. That way you know what was the thing that fixed it, or if it's still broken, what things could have made it worse. I was fortunate enough to get this with an official 2C monitor as well, so I'm going to go ahead and test this out. So my workbench isn't actually prepared for this yet. I should have done a little bit of foreplanning here, but I ended up having to get the monitor and the power adapter for everything hooked into the wall so that I can test this out. And whoops, this is actually a normal test pattern that will appear on the screen when the keyboard is not connected to the logic board. So I'm going to go ahead and hook the keyboard back up, and I'm going to get a boot disk. This is a copy of a different version of ProDOS that will automatically load when you power the computer on. And we have a boot screen. This is a good sign, but I won't start cheering for joy until I see the menu. And great, it looks like the drive is working. I'm going to go ahead and load a few commands from disk and see if it keeps working. The Apple IIc actually has a little bit of a built-in operating system, but it's not too smart in the fact that I can't get it to load from external disks or even save what I'm working on until I load an external operating system, which I believe is Apple ProDOS 2.1.1. Alright, well after playing around with this for a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and call this a successful fix. It looks like I only needed to clean the drive. Alright, so that is a good result. We are finally able to get discs to read. So on top of this, I decided to go ahead and try my store-bought game, and it loaded. I also decided to try out a few of my other discs, and it loaded all of them flawlessly. So I would call this project a success. So let's go ahead and get everything put back together, and I'm going to try out my store-bought game again. Now wait a minute. We just got this thing working when I had it taken apart. And sure enough, once again, I took the case apart, I got into the drive again, I didn't do anything differently, and it loads again. So I'm not quite sure exactly what my issue is. If I had the parts to actually swap out the drive with a different drive, I would try that, but since I'm short that part, I'm going to go ahead and have to leave this as it is. But there is another solution. So that's about as far as I got with this project before making this video. However, in a future video, I actually plan to upgrade the drive with something different. And since I don't have any of those parts yet, I'm going to go ahead and leave this video as it is. If you guys have any comments or suggestions about what I should do to try to fix this drive, I'm definitely up for any suggestions, as all the methods that I've researched has not produced a different result. Well, that said, that's going to wrap it up for this project, but please stay tuned for part 2, as I do have some parts on order, and I hope that when they come in, I'm able to do something different than having to worry about maintaining this old floppy disk drive. Remember, if you like what you see, please hit that like and subscribe button, share with a friend. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned because I have more content coming. I'll see you guys next time. If you like this video and you'd like to help out with future projects on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Also, if you enjoy the content of this channel, please remember to click on this subscribe button. Again, I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you'd like to see some of the content I've already done, feel free to click on some of the suggestions that are popping up on your screen. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.